Hi everyone, and welcome in a new episode of How I Fixed Your Data. Today with Daryl from Cogent. My name is Jonas. I'm the co-founder of Koalify. We are a HubSpot plugin for deduplication. Daryl, can you please introduce yourself and what you do exactly with Cogent?
Thank you, Jonas. My name is Daryl and Cogent Connective. So we help clients with ERP systems and CRM system integrations, particularly getting the best out of both of them. And often people have one or the other, or they have both and they're not connected, and they end up with two data sets. And our experience is that once the data is connected and you have you have both systems in sync properly, then that's when the power of both systems come to life, because in the CRM you can get the data from the ERP, and in the ERP you're seeing data that comes directly from the CRM, so it improves your processes.
Okay, cool. That's interesting, because that means that you're not only focused on HubSpot, but also broader ERPs. Like, which solutions are you very often using?
Yeah, that's good. So we focus solely on OrderWise as an ERP system. We've had 15 to 20 years experience in using OrderWise, actually in a business that we ran using the system. So we come from using it on the coalface and having been through the frustrations of how the ERP worked or didn't work, what it was good for, how it worked for CRM purposes, and we also used HubSpot as a solution ourselves for a CRM in the previous company. And then once we came into Cogent and it was born, we looked at making the two systems talk to each other in a way that made sense. It's very easy to put data in sync, but it's harder to make the data more usable in one system and the other. So that's where we focus primarily on OrderWise and HubSpot.
Okay, cool. That's interesting. And to keep the data not in sync, but also in a clean sync and up to date on both ends. So I'm curious to learn more in today's session. Could you maybe explain a bit more about the use case that you want to discuss today? For which customer did you solve a data quality issue?
Yeah, so one of our customers, they have been using OrderWise for a long period of time, and they recently moved from Freshworks CRM, service, etc. solution to HubSpot, and we helped with the migration. And coming from two different systems, so that we had data from OrderWise and we had data from the Freshsales and Freshdesk, pulling that together to give kind of a unified data solution was actually quite challenging, because you have totally different IDs, you have different ways of logging data. Sometimes people logged the email addresses correctly. In OrderWise it was a bit more of a mess, so we ended up with a lot of usernames contact names that were okay, but the email addresses were all the same, so there may be like a shared mailbox. That caused an issue, because HubSpot only takes one email address, as you know, for the contact. It's almost like an ID, and we would end up with kind of a lot of duplication. It's difficult to solve that. So we immediately went to look at Operations Hub, which was purchased in the solution, but Operations Hub helps to a certain extent, and then you need a little more flexibility where you can look at where the names are similar and where addresses are similar and where telephone numbers are similar, and that's where Koalify came in. And once we looked at that solution, that really presented itself as the answer to all the issues that we were experiencing when data importing.
Okay, cool. More on the specific implementations later, I guess, but like, could you first explain a bit like what challenges the customer was running into? Like, you already highlighted the duplicated emails, so you just migrated them to HubSpot, if I understand correctly. Like, what were they running into at that point?
Yeah, good. So when we looked to do the initial data transfer, it was fine if we pulled it from one system, but immediately once we start to bring in data from another system, when it's formatted differently, you have different sets of IDs, and neither system had corresponding correct information. That's where the initial challenge was, is how do we identify people with the same name, people with the same email address, people from the same company, different companies, maybe have slightly different names, but maybe generally would be associated together. So there was a lot of specifics that the client was like, well, how do we make sure we get the right companies merged and the wrong ones separated so that they don't merge? Like, what's the criteria for that?
Yeah, okay. That's indeed an interesting challenge if you have like two different sources coming together that have a totally different format. Then how did you approach this? Like, where did you start? You looked at Operations Hub first. Did you try a few things in Operations Hub and only then you looked into other solutions like Koalify, or like how did you tackle it in the first steps?
Yeah, that's good. So we knew that the client needed Operations Hub as a start for other processes in the HubSpot implementation. So we knew that was a first option because we would have that as part of the package. After going through what the options were with Operations Hub, it became clear that there just wasn't the flexibility to, it would look at data quality, which is one thing, but actually looking at merges, it would make recommendations that weren't based on multiple criteria.
Yeah.
And having known about Koalify quite a bit previously, this one was just an obvious option to go, look, we know it's got the flexibility to be able to choose between multiple properties and make sure that they match, and then also the order of priority in which they apply after one has been checked.
Okay, that makes sense. Could you maybe share your starting point, or how did you do the matching exactly in Koalify?
Yeah, cool. So if I just share my screen, the zero duplicates dashboard was really helpful because we were able to pick up straight away the types of duplicates that we're getting just with the standard settings within Koalify. And then once we started to look at where the duplications were, we could then see that actually we needed to drill a little bit deeper and set some of our own filters within the Koalify app. Yep. So if I just show you the setup for those.
Yeah, sure. What I can already see in the dashboard is that you clearly see the date of the migration. So they started the migration end of 2024. I can already see that it's probably implemented using SuperEd. So for those who don't use SuperEd, you can just with one click create the dashboards, check it out. But I'll let you continue, Daryl.
So once we're actually in Koalify inside the app, we're able to look at the duplicate rules. And this is where we were able to get quite granular. Because we have the OrderWise ID from OrderWise, we could use that to find any potential duplicates. That was the first starting step. So we added our own duplicate rules. So we looked firstly at first name and then last name. And then we were able to add things like OrderWise company ID. We were also able to do the same on companies, where we could look at the account number and postcode. And then we were able to remove those duplicates nice and simply. And the reason for looking at this was because the data in Freshsales, we were able to go through and add account numbers that the reps thought were relevant to the accounts. So they had a certain amount of information, but we couldn't directly merge that outside of HubSpot. We wanted to bring that both in so that when we imported based on email address, we'd get an immediate connection for the data that we knew was okay, and then the rest of the data we'd import without the email addresses and start to look at company data and where the companies are similar. So as you see here, we've got some new ones. We've got the OrderWise record ID, the phone, and the account number, which gives us a clearer match once we start drilling down into those, the real granular specifics.
And so if I have understood correctly, one of the first things that you did was enrich one of the data sets coming from Freshsales with the relevant OrderWise IDs, so the IDs of your backend system, and that way you could accurately identify a portion of your duplicates already and merge them directly in bulk with a high certainty because they were matching.
That's exactly right, yes. So we've got this one literally that just looks at the company record OrderWise ID. And this one's quite interesting because we've got 4,440 there. But this was more used for reference so that we could then dive into that list and start looking at, well, is this actually a duplicate or not? So we were able to use that list rather than set up a workflow for this specific one. We exported the list and went through where there was a duplicate name. We knew that would probably be the case, but in some cases we just had to look at whether an ID had been incorrectly matched where the name differed completely. And then once we get a bit more granular, we can then start to see, right, does the company name and the OrderWise ID and the phone number and the account number actually match? So you can see like the 2,349 have reduced the count, and this is more specific. So this has been quite a good journey with the client to show them their own data and get them to do some of the analysis and find out, okay, if a company does have the same name, there might be 10 companies in the UK that do have the same name, some of which may come from a parent account, some of which may be just genuinely separate companies, so we need to remove them. So hence the OrderWise ID was a unique identifier that we could use.
Yeah, nice, interesting use case. And like, what were then the first wins that you could share with your client? Was it like the overview, low-hanging fruit that you could bulk merge?
Yeah, the best thing was the ability to go through and do things in bulk and with a workflow, because at the click of a button in just a few minutes you could merge vast quantities of data once you were certain that you knew exactly what it was. And I think that's the benefit with the Koalify integration, is that you can specifically state which duplicate rule that you're applying in the workflow. If I just share my screen, I can go through that, and that for us has been a massive win. So where we've got this one here with the merge duplicate companies on account number and postcode, we're able to go in here and look at the duplicate rules from Koalify and be really explicit as to which one we want to look at.
Yeah, and those are merged automatically whenever they're detected. Okay, cool.
Exactly, yeah.
And like now this is an integration or a migration project where the client starts in HubSpot. Do you think that they will continuously create new potential duplicates, and do you want to have an automated process in place, or is it rather as a one-off? Or you don't know yet today because you don't know how many duplicates are being created?
No, that's a really good point. So one of the risks is that at some point, because the reps might be out on the road or they may be in different areas, there is a risk that someone enters something with a slight variation of company name and don't enter a domain name, for example. So HubSpot doesn't automatically pick that up. When they're able to add records to that deal, you'll end up with two, or not deal, but to the company record and the contact record, you end up with two separate sets of information. The risk is that those two separate sets get assigned to two different people and two projects run simultaneously but without the other knowing. So Koalify enables those records to be merged, and because it's in a workflow, we're also able to determine who the owner should be. So if the primary record if it's just you want to use the primary record, that's cool. So we can assign, it'll automatically be assigned to the primary record holder. But we could also then determine who gets that company or a contact by adding further steps in that same workflow.
Yeah.
Depending what the outcome is.
Yeah, and reassign if needed, just to avoid that there are two reps working on the same project, on the same company.
Yes.
Cool. We're almost out of time, so maybe let's jump to some conclusions or results. Like, what have been some results that you already saw with this specific project?
Yeah, that's good. So I think the biggest thing is data clarity. Because there was duplications in the old system in Freshsales, there was no way of automatically merging those contacts in the same way that you can within HubSpot, even just with the basic HubSpot provisions for merging. But Koalify has taken that to the next level, tidied up the data massively, and enabled reps to get into the data and start looking at where the same contact was split previously. Now that data is in one silo or one space for that record, and yeah, it's made it much easier for people to work out of. The project has gone on a little longer because initially we needed to look at the data and make sure that when we did the first imports, that we'd sort of cleaned up as much as we could, so that the first imports were good. But you can't do everything in an Excel spreadsheet, and often it's those comparisons as you go through. As you'll see from the dashboard, there's been data added at different points during that onboarding process. So it's been brilliant to see that progression and find out, okay, we've added 4,000 contacts now in February, and of those 4,000, 1,000 of them are actually duplicates based on names, IDs, email addresses, etc. So it's been brilliant to catch that as we go through the project, because we're talking, 40,000 contacts and around 10,000 companies. So there's a lot of potential there for duplication.
Yeah, especially since they're coming from the two systems that were not really talking to each other. So it's still ongoing, as I understand.
Absolutely.
What are some lessons learned for yourself, things that you might do differently with another project?
Yeah, that's good. There's been a lot of lessons actually. Ones that you find as you build an app. So our integration for HubSpot is coming for OrderWise, and the biggest lesson we've learned in this is using the HubSpot properties as unique identifiers and being able to set those. You get up to 10, I believe, possibly per record or per database, just forget which. But that as we've done the secondary sort of imports, third imports, etc., we've been able to take those IDs and make them unique. So that immediately shows us before or when we're doing the import, if there are any duplicates that we've included by accident, we get a note of those on the export. And I think the ability to use those unique value properties is really helpful.
Yeah.
And I would say to anyone that's looking to integrate any system into HubSpot is really take a careful look at what the app marketplace says it can do, and then reach out to the provider who provides the integration to say, okay, how do you handle scenarios like this? Because the risk is that you just flood your HubSpot CRM with lots and lots of duplication, and potentially it becomes harder to start to solve that. Koalify is a brilliant solution in that scenario, but if we can start to solve that bit downstream, then that's a massive benefit. To the end user.
It's better to avoid the problem before it happens. There's some guidelines that we will definitely share on that topic in the coming weeks as well. But I also remember like your hint or your tip to create your unique properties that you can then reuse to do imports again and to avoid duplicates using those unique property values.
The other learning I would say as well is that always create properties for IDs of the other system that you're importing from. It's an absolute game changer, because you can always export and re-import using those unique properties or the old IDs for the other system. That's something we figured pretty early on was going to be necessary, and I'm really glad that we did do that. Even if it's not a unique property, just put in the ID for the other system for that record, because you can then do a match, and that definitely saves time.
Yeah, I remember that as well from my time as a consultant, also migrating from Freshsales, that you just need to import those Freshsales IDs because you probably want to update some of the data points later on, and having that ID available really helps and makes it pretty simple. So that's a good takeaway. I'm also curious about, you mentioned the integration that you're building. Could you maybe tell a bit more about that already, or is it too early?
Yeah, no, that's good. So we are actually just in the process of launching it. We've got a couple of tweaks to make on it, but we'd like to think it would be launched next week on so middle of February. It's an integration with OrderWise ERP. Previously, we've done versions of a data sync with HubSpot using other platforms like Pipedream and Make, and those are good if you want a simple transfer data between two systems. Where that type of solution falls down is you don't have any control over what you're syncing, and you require a developer to be able to help you to map those properties, or if you want to add something in, it's not just as easy as go in and turn it on. So we took the concept of what if the client held control over what they synced to and from their system, kind of like the HubSpot data sync model, but we were able to then take that a step further and put cards, use the new app cards feature from HubSpot inside the records to be able to perform certain actions in the other database. And what we were hearing so often was that there just wasn't the flexibility of any integration for OrderWise in the marketplace. So we decided to go ahead and build one and take all of those learnings almost immediately and put them into practice. So this is kind of what it looks like once it's installed. We have the API credentials section, which we can pop them in, and then we can do a test sync and run the test just to make sure it works. And then we have the billing portal. We can look at the sync history so that we can check to see if there are any errors during that process. We can see whether it's an update or a creation. And then we can also manage the property mapping. And this is kind of where the gold is, because not everybody wants to sync everything at once. So we're able to turn on that sync, and then we're able to choose the specific properties that we want to map. So the first 3 are required because that gives us the ID and the updated date and time and the last updated. But then we can also go through and say, well, I actually don't want to sync this line, or I don't want to sync this property, and I can just turn them off. It then goes into more custom properties that exist in OrderWise but not in HubSpot, and I can map those to similar property values if they exist. We're working on a little feature so that you can actually create a property straight from this page if it doesn't exist. But this is the first steps, and we've got at least 5 or 6 objects planned to map from OrderWise to HubSpot. Customers, contacts, variants, which HubSpot would refer to as products, orders, quotes to deals, and invoices. So the new invoice API is due out very shortly. And that's, or maybe it's in beta still, and that's kind of what we're hoping that we can get access to use for other people. We're syncing orders to the orders object, which has proved to be very successful, and it just gives so much life to the CRM when you can, when reps can see exactly what somebody has purchased, see their product history on a page. It's phenomenal what you can bring through. So we're really excited.
It looks very clean. Love that it's also fully embedded within HubSpot. So cool to see. Looking forward to that integration. Nice. Cool. Let's wrap up. Is there any final notes that you want to share?
I would say the thing that I love about the Koalify integration is its simplicity, and it's easy for an end user to understand how to use it. It's not complex. You know, you've got the primary record, you've got the duplicate rules, and you know, it's easy for them to see how many records are in their database so they know what the billing is going to be. And that's often a challenge for some apps in the marketplace because you don't know what the value is going to be, but you can easily see that from Koalify. So I would say if anyone has an issue with duplicates in their database, is rather than go all out on Operations Hub if you haven't already got it, just for deduplication, have a look at Koalify, because the chances are it will save you a lot of time, it will save you extra money for stuff you don't need in Operations Hub, and I'm not downgrading Operations Hub because it works really well and you've got custom coded workflows, but I think for just deduplication, it's better to look at the more point solutions where you can actually solve the problem properly, like Koalify.
Yeah, okay, cool. That's a great final note. Thanks for your time, Daryl, for sharing your insights.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me on.